Every economic crisis brings the same misguided response from Washington: spend trillions of borrowed dollars to stimulate growth. Politicians promise that massive government spending will restore prosperity, create jobs, and lift America from recession. Yet after decades of such policies, from the New Deal through the 2008 bailouts to the recent pandemic spending, we witnessed the same outcome: temporary artificial booms followed by deeper busts, mounting debt, and systematic wealth destruction. The uncomfortable truth that political leaders refuse to acknowledge is that stimulus packages don't create wealth, they merely redistribute it from productive sectors to politically favored ones, while simultaneously destroying the price system that coordinates economic activity. Through praxeological analysis, I will demonstrate why every dollar of stimulus spending makes society poorer, not richer. The logic is inescapable: government cannot create resources out of nothing, and when it attempts to do so through monetary expansion and deficit spending, it systematically undermines the foundations of genuine economic recovery. Chapter 1: The Fundamental Economic Error of Stimulus Thinking. The entire concept of economic stimulus rests upon a fundamental misunderstanding of wealth creation. Politicians and Keynesian economists believe that spending, any spending, generates economic activity and prosperity. This fallacy treats consumption as the driver of economic growth, when logic demonstrates that production must precede consumption in all cases. When government announces a $1 trillion stimulus package, it creates an illusion of new wealth appearing magically from Washington's printing presses. Yet every dollar the government spends must first be extracted from the private economy through taxation, borrowing, or monetary expansion. There is no economic alchemy that transforms government spending into net wealth creation. Consider the praxeological reality: if I take $100 from your pocket and spend it at the local store, have I stimulated the economy? The store owner receives my payment, but you now lack the $100 you earned through productive work. The total amount of wealth in society remains unchanged, only its distribution has shifted. Government stimulus operates on this same principle, but on a massive scale with far more destructive consequences. The stimulus advocates commit what I call the broken window fallacy on a national scale. They observe increased activity in sectors receiving government funds and conclude that wealth has been created. But they systematically ignore the unseen effects: the businesses that fail because capital was diverted elsewhere, the innovations that never occur because resources were misallocated, the jobs that disappear in unfavored sectors. Most importantly, stimulus spending violates the fundamental requirement for economic progress: saving and capital accumulation. Real economic growth occurs when society produces more than it consumes, allowing for investment in productive capacity. Stimulus packages encourage immediate consumption at the expense of future production, systematically undermining the foundation of genuine prosperity. When government borrows to finance stimulus, it competes with private borrowers for the same pool of savings, driving up interest rates and crowding out productive investment. When it prints money to finance spending, it dilutes the currency and distorts price signals throughout the economy. Either method reduces society's total wealth below what it would have been under free market allocation. Chapter 2: How Stimulus Destroys the Price System. The price system represents humanity's greatest discovery for coordinating economic activity among millions of individuals without central command. Prices communicate information about relative scarcity, consumer preferences, and production costs across the entire economy. When government injects artificial spending into specific sectors, it systematically corrupts this information system. In a free market, rising prices signal increased demand and attract additional resources to satisfy consumer wants. Falling prices indicate oversupply or declining demand, encouraging producers to shift resources elsewhere. This automatic adjustment mechanism ensures that society's limited resources flow toward their most valued uses. as determined by voluntary consumer choices. Stimulus spending short-circuits this coordination process by artificially inflating demand in politically chosen sectors. When government spends billions on infrastructure, green energy, or job retraining, it sends false price signals throughout the economy. Prices in favored sectors rise not because of genuine consumer demand, but because of political allocation. These distorted prices mislead entrepreneurs and investors about genuine market conditions. Resources flow toward politically favored projects that appear profitable only because of artificial government demand. Capital and labor shift away from sectors that consumers actually value toward sectors that politicians prefer. The Austrian business cycle theory explains precisely how this process generates boom-bust cycles. Government stimulus creates clusters of malinvestment in politically chosen sectors. These investments appear profitable during the artificial boom, but they cannot sustain themselves once the stimulus ends. The inevitable bust requires painful readjustment as resources flow back toward genuinely productive uses. Consider the housing bubble that preceded the 2008 crisis. Government policies encouraged mortgage lending through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Federal Reserve monetary expansion. Artificially low interest rates and guaranteed mortgage purchases sent false signals about the profitability of housing construction. Resources poured into home building until the artificial support collapsed, revealing the massive malinvestment. Every stimulus package repeats this process across multiple sectors simultaneously. Government spending on favored industries creates artificial demand that attracts resources away from sectors consumers actually prefer. The larger the stimulus, the more severe the price distortions and the more painful the eventual correction. The tragic irony is that stimulus advocates claim to help the economy recover from previous government-induced distortions by creating new and larger distortions. Each intervention requires bigger subsequent interventions to postpone the day of reckoning, creating an addiction to government spending that becomes increasingly difficult to break. Chapter 3: The Seen and Unseen Effects of Government Spending. The fundamental error in evaluating stimulus policies lies in focusing exclusively on their visible effects while ignoring their hidden costs. Politicians eagerly publicize every job created by stimulus spending, every bridge built, every company rescued. They never mention the jobs destroyed, the projects that never begin, or the innovations that never occur because resources were diverted to political priorities. This analytical blindness reflects what Frederick Bastiat identified as the difference between good and bad economists. Good economists consider both the seen and unseen effects of any policy. When government spends $1 billion on electric vehicle subsidies, the visible effect is increased electric car production and employment in that industry. The invisible effects include all the productive activities that would have occurred if those resources remained in private hands. Every dollar extracted from the private economy through taxation represented someone's productive effort. That individual earned the money by providing goods or services that consumers voluntarily purchased. When government redirects this dollar toward political objectives, it prevents the original earner from investing, consuming, or saving according to their preferences and knowledge of local conditions. The multiplication effect works in reverse for government spending. Private individuals spend their money on projects they believe will improve their lives or generate returns. Government spends confiscated money on projects that serve political rather than economic objectives. The private spending would have created genuine wealth. The government spending creates artificial activity that cannot sustain itself without continued political support. Consider a specific example. When government spends $50 billion on high-speed rail, politicians celebrate the construction jobs and the impressive infrastructure. But they ignore the opportunity costs, the private investments that don't occur, the small businesses that can't expand, the innovations that entrepreneurs can't finance because capital was diverted to the politically favored rail project. The unseen effects extend beyond immediate opportunity costs. Government spending distorts relative prices throughout the economy, leading to systematic misallocation of resources. Industries that depend on government contracts grow beyond their economically sustainable size. Workers develop skills specific to politically favored sectors rather than skills valued by consumers in the marketplace. Perhaps most importantly, stimulus spending destroys the incentive structure that drives economic progress. When government rewards failure through bailouts and subsidizes inefficiency through targeted spending, it encourages more failure and inefficiency. Resources flow toward political connections rather than consumer satisfaction. I challenge you to observe this pattern in your daily life. Notice how many businesses succeed through government contracts rather than customer satisfaction. Count the industries that depend on subsidies and tax preferences rather than producing goods people voluntarily purchase. These represent wealth destruction disguised as economic activity. The cumulative effect of repeated stimulus policies is an economy increasingly dependent on political rather than economic decision-making, where success comes through lobbying rather than innovation, and where apparent prosperity masks underlying wealth destruction. Chapter 4: The Fallacy of Aggregate Demand Management. Keynesian economics, which provides the intellectual justification for stimulus spending, rests on the fallacious concept of aggregate demand management. This theory treats the economy as a simple machine where government can increase total output by boosting total spending. Such thinking ignores the fundamental reality that production, not consumption, drives economic progress. The aggregate demand fallacy assumes that all spending creates equal economic value. In this view, whether consumers buy groceries, businesses purchase machinery, or government builds monuments, the spending generates identical economic benefits. This reasoning treats economic activity as merely the circulation of money rather than the production and exchange of valuable goods and services. Praxeological analysis reveals the error: spending can only redistribute existing wealth, never create new wealth. Wealth creation requires production, the transformation of less valuable inputs into more valuable outputs through human labor and entrepreneurial insight. When government spends money it has extracted from private citizens, it merely moves purchasing power from private to political uses without creating any new productive capacity. The demand management approach also ignores the critical role of savings in economic development. Real economic growth requires that society produce more than it consumes, creating a surplus available for investment in productive capacity. Government stimulus policies explicitly encourage consumption over saving, systematically undermining the foundation of genuine prosperity. Consider the logical implications of demand management theory. If increasing spending automatically increases wealth, why doesn't government simply print unlimited money and make everyone rich? The theory's advocates must acknowledge that excessive money printing causes inflation, but they fail to recognize that this reveals the fundamental flaw in their reasoning: government cannot create real wealth through monetary manipulation. The inflation that eventually results from stimulus spending represents a hidden tax on everyone who holds money. When government finances spending through monetary expansion, it dilutes the value of existing currency holdings. This affects the poorest citizens most severely, as they hold proportionally more of their wealth in cash and have less access to inflation-protected assets. Furthermore, the demand management approach treats symptoms rather than causes of economic problems. Recessions occur when previous government interventions have created unsustainable distortions in the economy. The market correction process eliminates these distortions by allowing failed businesses to fail and redirecting resources toward productive uses. Stimulus spending prevents this healthy adjustment process, prolonging the underlying problems. The Austrian alternative focuses on supply-side factors, removing regulatory barriers to production, reducing taxes on saving and investment, and allowing market forces to coordinate economic activity. These policies actually increase society's productive capacity rather than merely shuffling existing wealth between different uses. History demonstrates the failure of demand management policies. Japan's lost decades following massive stimulus spending, the stagflation of the 1970s, and the recurring bubbles created by Federal Reserve interventions all illustrate how aggregate demand manipulation creates more problems than it solves. Chapter 5: How Money Printing Funds the Illusion. The modern stimulus system depends entirely on the government's monopoly over money creation. Without the ability to print unlimited currency, politicians could not finance massive spending programs without immediately visible tax increases that would provoke public resistance. The Federal Reserve's money printing enables the illusion that government can create wealth without cost. When government borrows trillions to finance stimulus spending, it must either tax citizens directly or convince the Federal Reserve to purchase government bonds with newly created money. Direct taxation immediately reveals the cost of government spending to voters. Money printing hides these costs through the complex and delayed process of inflation. The money creation process works like this: Treasury issues bonds to finance stimulus spending. Federal Reserve purchases these bonds with newly created digital currency. Government spends this new money on politically favored projects. The additional money enters circulation without any corresponding increase in goods and services, inevitably reducing the purchasing power of existing money holdings. This monetary expansion creates what economists call the Cantillon effect. Those who receive the new money first benefit from spending it at current prices, while those who receive it later suffer as prices adjust upward throughout the economy. Government contractors, subsidized industries, and government employees gain purchasing power at the expense of everyone else. The process represents a sophisticated form of counterfeiting. When private individuals print fake money, society recognizes this as theft and punishes it accordingly. When government creates money without backing, society treats it as legitimate economic policy. Yet the economic effects are identical: wealth transfers from money holders to money creators without any productive activity. Inflation serves as a hidden tax that falls disproportionately on the poor and middle class. Wealthy individuals can protect themselves through real estate, stocks, and other assets that typically appreciate during inflationary periods. Working families watch their savings lose value while their wages lag behind rising prices for food, housing, and energy. The international dimension compounds these problems. When America prints dollars to finance stimulus spending, it exports inflation to countries that hold dollar reserves or conduct trade in dollars. This enables larger stimulus programs than would be possible if America faced immediate balance of payments constraints. Modern monetary theory attempts to justify unlimited money printing by claiming that governments that control their own currencies face no financial constraints. This reasoning ignores the economic laws that ultimately constrain all human action. Government cannot create real resources through monetary manipulation, regardless of its legal authority to print currency. The Austrian school's analysis of the business cycle explains how monetary expansion creates artificial booms followed by inevitable busts. Easy money encourages malinvestment by distorting interest rate signals. Entrepreneurs begin projects that appear profitable only because of artificially low borrowing costs. When monetary expansion slows or stops, these projects prove unsustainable. I urge you to observe how monetary expansion affects prices in your daily experience. Notice how the costs of education, healthcare, and housing rise faster than official inflation statistics suggest. These sectors receive large government subsidies financed through money creation, making them particularly vulnerable to inflation. The solution requires ending the government's monetary monopoly and returning to sound money backed by real assets rather than political promises. Chapter 6: The Political Economy of Stimulus Addiction. Stimulus spending creates powerful political incentives that make it increasingly difficult to return to sound economic policies. Once government begins using artificial spending to address economic problems, it creates constituencies that depend on continued intervention for their survival. This political dynamic explains why stimulus policies persist despite their economic failures. The concentrated benefits and diffuse costs of stimulus spending ensure strong political support from beneficiaries and weak opposition from those who bear the costs. When government spends billions on green energy subsidies, solar panel manufacturers and environmental activists organize intensively to protect their benefits. Meanwhile, the millions of taxpayers who fund these subsidies face only small individual costs and have little incentive to organize opposition. This asymmetry creates what economists call regulatory capture, where politically favored industries gain disproportionate influence over the policies that affect them. The subsidized industries hire former government officials, contribute to political campaigns, and employ sophisticated lobbying operations to protect their benefits. They become skilled at presenting their private interests as public benefits. The intellectual class plays a crucial role in legitimizing stimulus policies. Keynesian economists provide academic respectability for policies that benefit the political class, while journalists and commentators popularize the notion that government spending creates prosperity. This intellectual support system makes it difficult for ordinary citizens to understand the economic fallacies underlying stimulus programs. Government agencies develop institutional interests in perpetuating the problems they ostensibly address. The Department of Energy has no incentive to achieve actual energy independence, as this would reduce its importance and budget. Similarly, agencies that administer stimulus programs have every reason to argue for larger and more frequent interventions. The timing of stimulus policies reinforces their political appeal. The visible benefits appear immediately or within a few months, while the costs emerge gradually over years or decades. Politicians can claim credit for job creation and economic activity while leaving the resulting debt, inflation, and malinvestment for future administrations to address. Crisis periods provide particularly favorable conditions for expanding stimulus programs. During recessions or emergencies, normal political resistance weakens as citizens demand immediate government action. Politicians exploit these crisis atmospheres to implement spending programs that would face stronger opposition during normal times. The addiction metaphor accurately describes the stimulus cycle. Each intervention provides temporary relief from economic problems while creating larger underlying distortions. When the artificial stimulus ends, the economy faces worse problems than before, creating pressure for even larger interventions. Like drug tolerance, each stimulus requires a bigger dose to achieve the same temporary effect. International comparisons reveal the long-term consequences of stimulus addiction. Countries that consistently rely on government spending to address economic problems experience slower growth, higher debt burdens, and less dynamic economies than countries that allow market forces to operate more freely. The path back to sound economics requires what politicians fear most: short-term pain for long-term gain. Ending stimulus programs would force the economy to adjust to real market conditions, eliminating artificial demand and allowing resources to flow toward genuinely productive uses. This transition period would involve bankruptcies, unemployment, and economic contraction as the economy purges malinvestments. Yet this adjustment process is precisely what the economy needs to restore genuine prosperity. Like a patient recovering from addiction, the economy must endure withdrawal symptoms to regain health. The alternative is continued stimulus dependency with gradually diminishing effects and eventually systemic collapse. Chapter 7: The Path to Genuine Economic Recovery. True economic recovery requires abandoning the stimulus illusion and embracing policies that actually increase society's productive capacity. Instead of redistributing existing wealth through government programs, America must focus on removing barriers to wealth creation and allowing market forces to coordinate economic activity efficiently. The first requirement is fiscal restraint. Government must stop financing current consumption through borrowing that imposes costs on future generations. This means eliminating deficit spending except during genuine emergencies and beginning the long process of reducing accumulated debt. Lower government borrowing reduces competition for private capital and allows interest rates to reflect real market conditions. Monetary policy reform represents an equally critical component. The Federal Reserve's ability to create unlimited money enables the entire stimulus system by allowing government to finance spending without immediate taxation. Returning to sound money backed by real assets rather than political promises would impose automatic fiscal discipline and eliminate the hidden inflation tax. Tax policy should prioritize production over consumption. Current tax systems penalize saving and investment while encouraging debt-financed consumption. Reducing taxes on business investment, eliminating double taxation of corporate profits, and allowing immediate expensing of capital investments would increase the economy's productive capacity. Regulatory reform offers enormous potential for increasing prosperity without government spending. Excessive regulations impose huge compliance costs on businesses and prevent entrepreneurs from developing innovative solutions to economic problems. Eliminating unnecessary regulations, streamlining approval processes, and reducing barriers to entry would unleash productive forces throughout the economy. The labor market requires particular attention. Minimum wage laws, occupational licensing requirements, and complex employment regulations prevent voluntary agreements between workers and employers. These interventions price low-skilled workers out of employment and prevent the labor market from adjusting to changing economic conditions. Trade policy should embrace the principle of comparative advantage by eliminating tariffs and import restrictions that protect politically favored industries at the expense of consumers. Free trade allows each country to specialize in activities where it has relative advantages, increasing total production and lowering costs for everyone. Most importantly, America must restore respect for property rights and voluntary exchange as the foundation of economic prosperity. When individuals can keep the fruits of their labor and trade freely with others, they have maximum incentive to produce valuable goods and services. Government's role should be limited to protecting these rights, not redistributing wealth according to political preferences. The transition to sound economic policies would initially cause disruption as artificial demand disappears and resources flow toward genuinely productive uses. Some businesses that depend on government contracts or subsidies would fail. Workers in politically favored industries might need to develop new skills. Regions that benefit from government spending would face economic adjustment. Yet this short-term disruption is the price of long-term prosperity. Like a forest fire that clears dead undergrowth and enables new growth, economic adjustment eliminates inefficient uses of resources and creates opportunities for innovation and genuine wealth creation. Historical examples demonstrate the benefits of market-oriented reforms. Countries that have reduced government intervention, eliminated trade barriers, and restored sound money have experienced dramatic improvements in living standards. The economic miracles in post-war Germany, Chile after market reforms, and various Asian countries all resulted from embracing free market principles rather than stimulus spending. The choice facing America is clear: continue down the path of stimulus addiction with gradually diminishing returns and eventual fiscal crisis, or embrace the proven principles of free market economics that created American prosperity in the first place. The laws of economics cannot be repealed by political will or good intentions. Conclusion. The logic is inescapable. Stimulus packages cannot create wealth because government possesses no magical power to transform consumption into production or to generate resources from nothing. Every dollar of stimulus spending merely redistributes wealth from productive private uses to politically chosen purposes, while simultaneously corrupting the price system that coordinates economic activity. The persistent failure of stimulus policies, from the New Deal through Japan's lost decades to America's recent spending sprees, demonstrates that good intentions cannot overcome economic laws. Government intervention creates artificial booms that require increasingly larger doses of spending to maintain, ultimately leading to systemic distortions that impoverish society. The path forward requires abandoning the comfortable illusion that politicians can solve economic problems through spending programs. True prosperity emerges from saving, investment, and voluntary exchange, not from money printing and deficit spending. Americans must choose between the temporary political benefits of stimulus addiction and the permanent economic benefits of free market principles. The science of human action provides unshakable foundations for understanding why stimulus fails and free markets succeed. I encourage you to study these principles deeply, for economic truth eventually prevails over political error, regardless of how many Nobel Prize winners endorse the fallacies of our time. The future of American prosperity depends on our willingness to embrace logical economic principles even when they contradict popular political narratives.